I'm Peter Kavanagh, and welcome back to our teaching series, Why on Earth Did Jesus Pray? We are still in Luke's Gospel. We're still in Luke chapter 9 for the thought we're going to consider now. It's the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, this is in all the Gospels, of course, Matthew, Mark and Luke, all the synoptic Gospels, and is a very important part of Bible history, so much so that not only is it here, but it gets repeated in some form anyway in 2 Peter, as Peter remembers this incredible evening on the mountain. They climb the mountain with him, maybe Mount Tabor in Israel, and Jesus is transfigured among them. He shines brightly, and Moses and Elijah appear. God the Father himself speaks in an audible voice. What an amazing experience it must have been for Peter, James and John to have been there. Now, we're going to look at one tiny detail in Luke 9 that only appears in the Luke version and maybe helps us to understand it a little more. Luke 9 and verse 29 says this: "As he was praying," that's Jesus of course, "the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning." I wonder if you had ever noticed before that it was while he was praying that this transfiguration took place. Well, once again, if you hadn't noticed it, it's because it's only here in Luke. The others don't tell us this. Now, I want to take a slightly metaphorical approach to this, as you'll see. But I want to talk about how prayer changes us. Now, of course, the reason I have to be a little metaphorical is because Jesus is not quite like any of us. And so some of the things I want to attribute to us, I wouldn't attribute to him. But we certainly need changing, don't you think? And this comes about in many ways, but one of the ways is by prayer. If I were just to take a broader approach to this story, what was inside of Jesus began to be made manifest on the outside. The appearance of his face changed. His clothes became brightly lit. And we know that when we look at passages, well, a little bit like Revelation chapter 1, where Jesus appears to John again in this, I'll say this transfigured form, this glorious, glorified form, divine form, and they're not too dissimilar. Here on the mountain, Jesus' deity, I think, is being made manifest. That's how I read this story. That the fact he was the Son of God, sort of in disguise, in a human being suit, suddenly, just for a moment, this disguise is dropped and we see who he is. Now, that's what I mean when I say we can't quite apply this exactly to ourselves. But what we can say is this, that God, through prayer, wants to change us. And perhaps more pertinently here, what is already on the inside needs to come out. I've often said this: Christianity is an inside job. You know, if there's a crime that takes place and the police say, I wonder if it was an inside job, what they mean is that some force, some agency, normally some person, on the inside allowed this crime to take place. Of course, in the scriptures, we know from Jeremiah 31 that in the New Testament, God has not sought to write his laws on tablets of stone, but he wants to write them on our hearts. And so Christianity is God working in us and through us. Religion, in its harshest forms at least, is when we have to measure up and change to some external set of commandments. But by the Spirit, in this glorious new covenant we have through Jesus Christ, now we have the law of God working from the inside out. If I can just spend time in his presence, then I can be changed, and he will change me. It reminds me of a great verse. I love to preach from it, John 14 and verse 15, where Jesus says this in John's Gospel: "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And I've often shared this in pastoral situations, but to my own soul as well, of course, that my primary task is to love the Lord with all my heart, all my soul, all my mind, all my strength coming last. First and foremost, all of my heart. You see, if I can love him with all of my heart, then I'm going to keep his commandments. The epistles of John say this, that the commandments of God are not burdensome. So if I'm finding them burdensome to obey, I must be doing something wrong. I want to suggest that what I'm doing wrong is that I'm focusing on trying to keep rules and commandments, and it's not that there aren't any, there are. Jesus says in Matthew 28, I want you to teach disciples all over the world to keep my commandments. So there are commandments, but they're not burdensome. And they're not burdensome when I focus not so much on the commandments, but upon him. Being in his presence. That what is on the inside might be able to come out on the outside. That I and you, we could all have our own mini transfiguration, where that good work that God is doing in us will shine out of us. Let your light so shine that people may see your good works. That's what the light is. And praise your Father who is in heaven. That's what Jesus said. Paul, of course, put it another way. In Galatians chapter 5, he spoke about the Spirit being at work in us to produce fruit of godly character, love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, etc. And these things grow by the Spirit from the inside out. I remember one time I had a dispute with somebody, and we'd had a bit of a falling out. And to this day, I'm sure it was my fault. I'm not blaming anyone, but we certainly had slightly fallen out. And at that time, I didn't know how this could really be resolved. I don't even know if I wanted to resolve it. I was a bit hard-hearted. But there was a lunchtime, and I was at work, and I gave my lunch hour or half hour, whatever it was, just to be in God's presence. I used to do that at that time in that place where I worked. I was able to. And so I would just sit in his presence. I didn't ask him for things. I didn't say too much. I worshipped him, and I sat in his presence. Glorious. Then, within about 10 minutes of that finishing, I had to get back to work. And as I was walking across the place where I worked, I saw this person with whom I'd had a bit of a falling out. I wasn't expecting to see them at all. They didn't work there. And before I could do anything different, I heard myself say to him, I'm so sorry about everything. You're such a good and godly man, and I'm sorry I hurt you. And I just instinctively apologized to him. And we were reconciled, and I walked on. Well, can I tell you, I hadn't planned to do that. I'm not even sure I even wanted to do that. Perhaps I should have wanted to, but I'm not sure I did. But I knew what had happened. By being in God's presence, I'd been changed. So I want to recommend to you, allow the Trojan horse principle to take place. You know the story, don't you, of how the Greeks left a horse, a wooden horse, and it was taken into the city of Troy. And the Greeks looked like they'd fled and, given up on the battle. But in fact, inside the Trojan horse, as it would become known, there was an army ready to take the city of Troy. And it was a strategy that worked. Well, similarly, Christianity is an inside job. As we sit in his glorious presence, he fills us, and we are gloriously changed. In an era of world history where people have sought to find vaccines for problems, diseases, there is a real desire among many Christians to be free of sin, free of bad habits and things that displease God. Well, here's the vaccine, if you'd like to take it. If you love Jesus, you'll just instinctively, habitually, naturally keep his commandments. While he was praying, the appearance of his face changed.